Welcome to Studio Visits with Silver Eye, where I get to talk in depth with some of the most interesting contemporary photographers working today about their latest projects. I'm David Oresick, the Executive Director of Silver Eye Center for Photography. Silver Eye works to promote the power of contemporary photography as a fine art medium by creating original exhibitions, unique educational programming like this series, and through the Lab at Silver Eye, a space for artists to learn, create, and connect. This week, I spoke with Jacob Haupt, an artist based in Salt Lake City who works with photography, video, and sculpture, and who has made some of the most interesting photo books I've seen in recent years. His work uses pop culture as both a metaphor and a mirror for addressing what he's called the tragedy of becoming an adult. This conversation was really insightful for me. We got to talk about how Jacob got comfortable expressing his feelings through his artwork, whether nostalgia is good for us or not, and the enduring appeal of Batman and the mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I was especially interested to talk about the importance of family in his work and how he has created one of the most peculiar family albums ever made. I really hope you enjoy our conversation. Jacob Haupt, welcome to Studio Visits with Silver Eye. I came across your images for the first time maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I think it was on Ain't Bad, a feature on a series that you had done called Gloom. And I thought it was one of the funniest and most distinctive visual styles I had seen in photography. It really stood out from all the photography that I look at all the time. And immediately I was like, I need to get my hands on this book. I need to learn more about this work. And, I got in touch shortly thereafter with you. But I guess my first question is, how did you develop this first series and this kind of overall visual style that you've been working in?
Good question. For Gloom was towards the end of my undergrad, and before working on it, I'd been working in photography for, I want to say, like 2 years. I haven't always been working in photography as like an art form. I think a lot of things led up to kind of this style that I feel like solidified in the Gloom series. And part of that came from just starting out in photography. I took classes from my professor, Daniel Everett. When I was in his class, I learned some skills about how to light things, but also how to really even them out, which I think at first I was a little wary of because I am drawn to things that are pretty lo-fi, but I quickly became interested in it because I realized that the things I was taking pictures of were already lo-fi.
When I'm thinking about the visual style, I'm thinking almost primarily about your props and your
Hmm.
costumes and your references and your like what you kind of called this lo-fi aesthetic for a lot of the materials that become the costumes and props.
I just, even when I started shooting photographs, the first series I made was called Beyond the Super Rainbow, and it was a bunch of portraits, just square portraits that I would shoot in my living room of myself, my wife, and friends. And in those, just tried to kind of use any materials that were available or easily obtained. I think that kind of helped me experiment with a whole range of materials like shaving cream and streamers. And then later, I I think the other thing that helped me kind of like develop my prop making skills and costume making skills was I worked on a book called Infinity Gate with my friend Noah Jackson. We really worked at a really breakneck speed. We decided just to make it our summer project, and we'd get off work at like 5 and just shoot into the night, and then on weekends go on like tiny road trips.
Mhm.
And just having to make props and costumes kind of really fast really helped me like solidify like a lot of the things that I do now. Like I'm looking at this picture of the Bat Cave monitors. The stalagmites in that are just their aquarium rocks. I think they're aquarium rocks on top of like blue Play-Doh. There's something really fun about making. I usually always make a drawing, and then I will from that drawing, try to translate it into something that's sculptural to photograph,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's one big set or a bunch of tiny sets and sculptures, and then collage them together. But I feel like I'm always learning new ways to make things based on like this need to translate from a drawing.
Maybe, one image that I'm looking at is called Asleep, from that Gloom series, and it's your Batman asleep in bed, tucked into his bat sheets, and he's obviously wearing his costume as he sleeps. It's a very funny image, but I think one thing that caught my eye was just the variety of materials that have gone into creating this. So can you walk us through what the prop making process for an image like this was, especially this Batman mask, which is one of my favorite kind of objects that you've made.
I like the mask too. It ended up turning out really well. For the mask, it was actually really funny. I was just searching. I was at work. I was just looking up. I like to just Google search whatever my actual questions are, even if it's like kind of embarrassing. So just like I know how to make a mask, but I was like, how to make a Batman mask. And I don't know, it always ends up being really interesting. And especially when you find like a good instructable. And I
Mm-hmm.
found this instructable for how to make a mask, and it was a way that I still use now because it's so fun and just kind of immediate. And it was this instructable how to make a Batman mask specifically. And the way that I learned how to make this, and it's how I made it, is you get a plastic grocery bag and you put it on your head, and you cut out like a mouth hole, and you cut out eye holes, and then you just start layering duct tape on top of that, and you just use the duct tape to form the shapes, and then it creates like a nice head shape. And then I think I cut out some poster board for the ears. And then but then I didn't want it just to look like the duct tape, because I don't know, some like I do have some duct tape masks in the series, like in the Bat Dream picture, the two bats in that, their masks are just duct tape and then they're painted. And I think there's some foamies in there too. But with the Batman one, I wanted it to be less glossy. And so I ended up covering the duct tape with small pieces of masking tape to kind of, I don't know, give it more of a paper mache kind of feel and
Mm.
finish. And I think it's just Xerox paper for the eyes taped in underneath.
I think there's a really interesting relationship between the props and the costumes and the sets that you make and the things you're depicting. And thinking about superheroes and comic books and kind of different kinds of adventures, why are you drawn to these subjects? Why Batman?
Yeah, I'm often wondering the same things. I think like I try to make, I don't know if I know how to take pictures or make pictures of something that I'm not in love with in some way. And so I think that's where it starts, but I think that is kind of a question that I'm thinking about while I'm making, is why am I drawn to this?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't always realize it, but I think like I'm kind of accepting that it's just a part of me. I
Mm-hmm.
think because I grew up with these things, spent a good amount of my time and creativity devoted to them, whether that was just making drawings or even just like playing with toys.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really stuck with me. For Batman in particular, I just wanted to, when I started the series, I just was wanting to make some kind of silly Batman pictures just for fun. When I was drawing, I just, you know, some of the drawings that are coming out, like one of the first drawings I made was the Batman that's over the city and he's crying. I realized that it wasn't very funny right away. And I realized that I wasn't, I think I was maybe trying to have fun because I was actually sad and trying to distract myself from how sad I was. And there's a picture of him that he's like on a tile floor. That was one of the next drawings I made. And I think sometimes I want to make things, and then I'm other times, and even in those times, I'm just taken by what is going to come out of me regardless.
Well, I think that's another reason why the Batman images are so interesting to me, because as a character, Batman is the saddest, kind of angriest of the superheroes. He's got this like tragic past. He's an orphan. He's super rich but super lonely. And the thing that really struck me, especially with things like the Batman crying over the city, is that they're funny, but there's a lot of like really there is a sadness there that does come through, and it does connect with the sadness of the character, but I did sense that there was maybe a sadness in the creator as well.
Yeah, I think I hadn't really made kind of fan art up to that point within like my other than like just drawings I'd made throughout my life. But I realized there was a huge potential for me to make art, like make a photograph of myself as a character because it helped me work through things. So with Batman, what I found when I was making it is it made me feel better about myself and my life because it was this character that you kind of look up to, and it is kind of a model of what a man is, and it's a man that a lot of people look up to, um
Hmm.
where I am, and making him sad and making him like showing him constantly fail and constantly alone made me feel like, I guess that's like it kind of normalized it for me to see it on a mythological.
I want to ask another question, but also feel free to not answer this question at all. And we can just skip it and go to the next one. But do you want to talk about what you were feeling sad about in general when you were making this work?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I had a statement that I wrote for it that talked about the tragedy of becoming adult. I think that definitely described how I felt making the work. And that's something I've struggled with most of my life is realizing like I feel like I've had to become adult in many ways from an early age, but I've been able to hold on to so many like things from my childhood, and I think it was hard to let that kind of like accept that part of me because I think part of becoming an adult means like becoming responsible or learning how to behave um, within kind of the system that we exist in, and in a way that's responsible. And I think often when you see someone that's holding on to childhood things, we think that they're very childish. And so I think, yeah, part of that tragedy is just like the world kind of telling you that the way you are isn't strong, isn't good enough, and you need to change or else you're not going to survive and you won't be dependable. And at this time it was like close to when I was graduating. I had I think a similar experience to a lot of people that go through art programs is you think things are going to work out a certain way at the end, and more often than not there isn't really any leads and all your friends move away.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
sure.
and so yeah, I was very frightened by kind of the responsibilities and the change, and just like kind of feel this constant feeling that who I was needed like to change in a dramatic way.
How did you think about developing the character throughout these images?
I don't know if I did. I think at a certain point I realized that some of the funnier drawings that I'd made weren't gonna fit within the series, or I didn't want to go that direction. But I didn't think a ton about the character because I think it was kind of just me, and it was. But I think like of the
And
picture with like Catwoman and like developing like that character, I wanted to show I wanted to show his kind of romantic life, and but I also knew that I didn't want to have any other characters ever really in the images themselves because I wanted to preserve his loneliness
that's so interesting.
to kind of like the maximum degree.
To transition to your your next body of work, or a body of work that you did soon after this called Ultra Force, that has some similarities, but I think some key differences as well. You've got, what I would describe as a child of the late 80s and the 90s as Power Rangers, but this is not a series about loneliness. This is a series about togetherness. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, definitely. I started sketching them and thinking about this kind of bootleg Power Rangers team that around the same time I was making Gloom. It was actually a project I was thinking about making and had to kind of pick one to follow at that time. It just kind of was on the back burner for a while and I kept drawing things for it. And when it first started out, a lot of it was just kind of creating my own show. It was just having fun. But then as time went on, I feel like I went kind of through a range of emotions with it and kind of used it to explore how I was feeling shortly after the I made most of the Gloom series. The 2000 election happened, and I felt like that
So you mean
affected me.
the
And
2016 election?
yeah, yeah, and so then the it took like a really dark turn, and I was just kind of wanted to show good guys beating up bad guys because I just wanted to like punch a hole through the chest of evil.
Mm.
And so just these insanely violent images of these kind of like kid show characters beating the shit out of villains. And then i I just started to really not feel good about it. I realized it
Mhm.
was not making me feel good inside about myself. I realized that it just wasn't what I wanted to add kind of to the energy, like the world's energy, I guess.
Yeah.
I wanted to add something really positive because it's like I think we all just can't stand this person that has so much power where we live and is kind of working to erase, the hard work to make it a better place.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I wanted to just entirely focus on like positivity with like kind of positive energy with this series. And so that's kind of what changed its course and helped it become what it is now.
That's so, I mean, fascinating. I never knew about the roots of kind of violent images for this process, but I love how the anger transitions to these like deliriously happy Power Rangers that they're kind of doing high fives, and there's a kind of joyfulness to them. To think of that coming out of the kind of 2016 election is just, I mean, it makes me love them even more. I never really considered of them as a kind of political response, or a response to a political situation. Who are your models for this work?
For Ultra Force, um, all of the female rangers are Evelyn.
Who's Evelyn?
Evelyn's my wife.
Okay, yeah, I had a feeling they were family.
Yeah, so she's in a lot of them with me, and then myself. So the one where they're hugging, the embrace, that's me and Evelyn.
I was gonna guess that, but I wasn't sure. But I think I kind of love that.
I think I don't know, for me it's really important. Like I don't know, it's like more than just like making a good image in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's about, like for me it's like it is personal, and like making that image was special. It was like this is something that like I had drawn it and I was really happy about the drawing and really excited to shoot it because I knew it would be kind of a special image for me and Evelyn to be in and to share.
I could tell that the people that you're getting to model for you and that are participating in these photos are, one, it seems like they're having a ton of fun, and which is weird to say because they're all wearing masks, so like how could I know that? But it seems like they're having a lot of fun, and it seems like there is a kind of genuine connection happening within the photos that is something that it just seems like everyone is like, you've roped everyone into it.
Yeah, like especially in Ultra Force, I feel like people had a lot more fun than they'd ever had kind of like helping with a photo. And yeah, I think it is partly because that's kind of what the series is about. It's just about having fun with people you care about.
So, I know we've talked about this in a couple of different ways, but, maybe one of my bigger questions, especially about these two series, and a lot of your work is, do you consider yourself a nostalgic person?
Yeah, I think I definitely have some nostalgic feelings, but I think that actually look back at my memories, the nostalgia is kind of a fantasy. Like the memories themselves seem to be more fantasy based. Like they're not quite how they actually were. And so I think I'm more of an escapist than like a nostalgic person. If I had to
Mm.
like um say which way I lean, because I think like I liked playing and pretending I was a Power Ranger as a kid, but I think I really just wished I could be a Power Ranger. Like if I had to
Well,
pick one.
I think that's I'm sure there's some philosopher who knows a lot more about this than I do, but I always think of nostalgia and escapism kind of being two sides of the same coin, and that a sort of part of nostalgia for me is recognizing that I'm remembering things as being better than they were, right? It's that kind of rose colored glasses about the
Yeah.
past that, I think again the work kind of picks up on this, right? Because the work doesn't pretend to be some high gloss, high production value like fantasy, right? It's very transparent about its, cardboard and spandex and duct tape and all these kind of raw materials that are just really creatively and joyfully repurposed. But again, it's more about the joy of escaping into these places than it is about a specific memory or a specific past or like a really good time. And I think, if I can soliloquy a little bit more, I think one of the things I was thinking about when I was looking through your work is looking at old Batman cartoons or movies or comic books, and it wasn't necessarily that, like, looking back on them they were that great, but the idea that I could look back on, my own escape into a comic book when I was a kid and just like enjoy having that utter kind of escape into a fantasy world the way that your characters in the photos seem to have escaped.
Yeah, I think like I like how it kind of like bridges like your experience with the subjects, because I think like something that's happening in the work is like it it acknowledges that it's just not possible. Like the fantasy isn't like attainable, but I guess at the same time it's still like not, it's not saying like that it's less because of that. Like these things are still important in their own right.
Most of your newer photographs are a really direct collaboration with someone very close to you, with your daughter, Talia. How did you decide you wanted to make photographs, with your daughter?
It started a little like a, I guess the one of the earliest photos in it's from a long time ago before I even had started the series. The picture she has it's a Princess Sophia blanket over her head and a little skeleton stick. She is fun to work with because she's really psyched about being in photos, and I think the first one she's in, it's where it's a picture of Nine Numb from Star Wars and he's pushing a stroller. And after making that one, I think she just really liked being in the photos, and so I've been thinking about it more because I think that I have a lot of fun making the pictures with her, and I think I'm a little nervous that maybe she'll grow out of it,
Mm-hmm.
and not want to be in the pictures one day. So I
Mm-hmm.
try to do it more now. And but for this series in general, it's titled after something that she still says but would would say a lot when she was about like 3 or 4 years old, which is, "Did I scare you?"
Mm-hmm.
Immediately after, trying to jump out and do something scary.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think the series kind of is just like an evolved version of Peekaboo. I think everybody plays peekaboo with a little baby, and then we just maybe took it to the next level. And then I was like, oh, I want to make some photo. Like I think I there's a picture where it's just a balloon and I drew a face on it and then I threw a sheet over myself and I like ran out and I was like, rawr. And later that night I was like, I want to take a picture of this costume I made in like 5 seconds. That's kind of it. That's interesting. And then I was like, I want to make a whole series about this game and kind of a record, but also a tribute to this game. Just
Mm-hmm.
to remember having fun with Talia.
There's this moment where the relationship, the father daughter relationship, and the kind of tribute to a strange sense of humor and a silliness comes through. And I think it should be said, like, some of these pictures are like a little more scary, right? Like, you're getting kind of away from some of the kind of you're getting away from some of the overt kind of joyfulness of Ultra Force. I'm thinking about this one that's also untitled, that has her in this really creepy like clay mask in this parka pulled up, that is just totally bizarre and unnerving. But I have a feeling maybe she's just like grinning behind that mask.
Yeah, I think for some of the images, yeah, I want some of them to be a little darker because um I've always really liked scary movies and monsters, but I've always also had a sense that maybe that wasn't okay or like the most good thing to be interested in just from people around me. And for
Hmm.
that image though in particular too, I think I'm thinking about all the times as a parent, and I don't know if you've had this happen, but I feel like it didn't happen until my kid could start to walk. But there's been so many times where she hasn't tried to scare me that she's actually just horrified me. Like like when she first could walk, like sometimes she would come in our room in the middle of the night, but instead of coming in the room, she'd just stand in the doorway for a really long time. And that was so scary just to wake up and see
Yeah.
this tiny silhouette.
Do you think about these photos as relating to movies or television or pop culture the way the other work does?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's less direct. I think a big part of it is like part of being a parent is like back to parenthood is like kind of being it's kind of like a group project with your partner. And I think like horror movies, like Evelyn isn't super into horror movies. This isn't her favorite series, and so I appreciate her generosity, like helping out and allowing Talia to like take part in it. But I think the series kind of represents that too. It's like I love horror movies; they're a big part of my identity, and they're something I just love and cherish. And Talia has a pretty strong interest in it. I think just naturally most kids are interested in it because it's spooky and it's like kind of intense, and I don't know, it's interesting. It has some of the most interesting design characters and stuff. And so
Hmm.
the photo series kind of becomes a way to interact in this overlapping interest in a way that indulges me in being able to share this thing, this overlapping interest with my daughter.
Would you say Talia loves being photographed all the time? Does she love participating in these?
Yeah, so for the most part, unless it's going to be kind of tedious or like wearing a mask that is going to like not be fun to be in for an extended period of time, she's usually looks really forward to it and is eager to be in photos, which is different, when we're just hanging out with family members, or even sometimes even when Evelyn will take a photo, or even if I'm trying to just take like a sneaky photo on my iPhone, she'll say like, what are you doing? you know
Hmm. Hmm.
she feels a little, I think she feels like her privacy is a little bit invaded, which is I don't know, I feel that sometimes too, but I think it also just says a lot about the way we take photos as a family and how we, especially in just like posed family photos, like there's a way you're expected to behave and you're expected to show X emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And kids, I think, well, at least Talia, like I think she recognizes like that's, it's not, first of all, it's not fun. And
Mm-hmm.
second of all, like it's not natural. And so I think, I don't know, making these images is nice for me and seeing her eagerness to do it because I guess it's telling, it's like in a way it's kind of telling that it's like a right way to photograph people.
It feels like Talia has agency in these photos, that she's a collaborator. She's not just a model. Her, in one way or another, she or Evelyn or you or all these people are bringing these characters to life in a way that only they could. That you couldn't just find any old model to make these pictures happen.
Oh, yeah, that makes me think too, especially if like there's one of Evelyn, I think it's like Possessed, where she's on our carpet and she has the mask on, and I remember like, so she, like I said earlier, she's not my biggest fan of this series, Did I Scare You, but she's willing to pose for it. And I feel like sometimes she's like wondered if I could get somebody else for some of them. And I'm always like, no, not really. Kind of only want you to be in this because it's about us and it's about you. Like it isn't about her in a sense that like maybe there's this like demon inside her, but it's like it's about us like working together as a family. We made this image where she's painted green and we put on these fake nails on her. And when I was gluing on the fake nails on her hand, I accidentally glued my own pinky to her pinky. And if you've ever used nail glue before, it's basically super glue. So we were stuck, and I was more worried about it than I think she was, but it's just like, I think there's just a lot of experiences that have been similar where it's like something that should be pretty simple has gone south in a
Mm-hmm.
way that's like funny later. But like I think, so now I think when it's like, hey, can you help me with this photo, it's like there's some, especially if she's not into the project, it's like, yeah, I can help you. But there's a little bit of like
It's a
tiredness
little
and
bit of hesitation.
weirdness. Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe I suspected this looking at the work before, but now over this conversation, viewing your work as a kind of messed up family album, or like a kind of perfected family album, whichever way you want to think about it, is so wonderful. And I think about, obviously there's a huge history of artists, photographers using their families as inspiration, thinking about Sally Mann, or I know before we were talking about Ralph Eugene Meatyard, and Nicholas Nixon, and just tons of other people. Do you ever think about that tradition of artists photographing their family?
Yeah. My favorite um photographs of family are Larry Sultan's Pictures from Home.
Mm-hmm.
I think that series is really moving and really relatable as a child who's an artist whose parents are not artists. um, I think about that a lot, like just kind of the tenderness that he showed towards them. Like I'm not as inclined to write about it as he was, but I appreciate that he did because it kind of shows that the images, like there was a struggle to make those images. They weren't, the most willing subjects, and they were somewhat suspicious of him at times. Like, what's your motive behind taking this picture of your mom like this? I like being able to kind of see the tension, I guess, in his family relationship.
Do you think about these as like photographs of your family, or photographs of a family?
Absolutely. Yeah, these are like, they are pictures of me, Talia, and Evelyn in the place we live, like in our apartment. I think they're the most straightforward photos I've ever made,
Yeah.
which maybe that's silly. But yeah, I absolutely think of them as family pictures. Like I think about like when I'm making them, like I'm looking forward to looking at them when till I was grown up. And I'm looking forward to looking at them when I'm old. Like
Hmm.
that's something I really am excited about. All photographs that I make is being able to
Yeah.
look at them when I'm older and kind of like just how that will change their feeling to me.
Jacob Haupt, thank you so much for sharing this work with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime.